appreciate you presenting to the caucus here.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here on this sunny, almost, is it 70 out there yet? I know that there was some talk of it being close to 70. So it's Vermont Advanced Directive Week. So this is perfect timing. This is the week that Vermont has declared to be the time when we should focus as Vermonters on making our healthcare wishes known. It also coincides with what will be on, I believe, Sunday of this week, National Healthcare Decisions Day. So that's the day across the country that people are focusing in on this topic of medical decision making, advanced care planning, and advanced directives. So it's timely for me to be here with you guys today. So I'll share my screen. I thought I would just go through kind of a brief overview of medical decision making, the process and tools. I'm just curious before I do that, do people have any specific questions? There's not many of you on the call, so I would invite people to turn on their camera if they're comfortable. So it's always much more enjoyable to see faces than just names on a black screen. And also would invite people, if they have any questions that they are hoping that I could answer today, to just unmute yourself and ask your question so I can be sure that I try to address it in the course of what I'm going to present today. Oh, and Dan, maybe you could tell me, how much time do I have?
So we usually have a full hour, but
Okay.
Take what you want, and glad you're here.
Great, thanks. So does anybody have any particular questions they were hoping that they might, learn more about today? If so, please unmute yourself. And so I see someone waving. Is that you, Pamela?
I'm sure you'll get to this, but is an advanced directive sufficient, like for ambulances and stuff, or do you have to have a COLST?
It depends on what the problem is, but if you're talking about a limitation of treatment, like say, I'll just use CPR as an example because that's a frequent one. If somebody really didn't want to be resuscitated if their heart stopped, would an advanced directive that says, please don't resuscitate me, be sufficient for EMS to honor that preference? The answer is no. An advanced directive is not sufficient in and of itself for EMS to honor that preference. What you would need is a DNR COLST order, and I will talk about that in the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. Anything else? And if not, I can certainly just dive right in. Okay, so let me share my screen. You guys, is everyone seeing that?
Yes.
Great. Let me just see if I can make it so that I can see all of you, since some of you are kind enough to turn on your screen for me. I love being in my office where I have more than one screen, so I can see both you guys and my slide. So I'm the director and clinical ethicist here at the Vermont Ethics Network. So we're a small not-for-profit organization, and the bulk of what I do for work is to help folks navigate medical decision-making questions. I also work with healthcare facilities and healthcare providers of all stripes as it relates to sort of thorny ethics questions that arise in the course of caring for patients and families. And then I direct Vermont's statewide task force on palliative care. So I wear a number of hats, but the work kind of overlaps. I thought it would be interesting to just talk during National Healthcare Decisions Week and Vermont Advanced Directive Week about this whole idea of advanced care planning. And what I mean by advanced care planning is just very basic, just thinking about and planning for the what ifs that can happen across the lifespan. Sudden accident, illness, anything can happen regardless of how old you are, regardless of what your baseline health is. And is there a plan in place so that healthcare providers and the people who care about you know what to do, know how to take good care of you? And because the goal being really to make sure that the care and treatment that is provided aligns with what you want to have provided. So this is all about making sure that we're delivering good care to people in a way and in a manner that respects who they are and what their priorities and preferences are. So that's really what advanced care planning is all about. I think one thing to keep in mind, and if anyone's got their microphone on, if they could just mute. I'm hearing a little bit of background noise, and sometimes that makes it hard to hear for others on the call. Thank you. In general, as people age, there's like this natural progression of change that happens, right? I don't have to tell any of you that. I'm experiencing it myself. If you have chronic conditions, they progress. New health issues emerge. And so that means that what we have to do to manage those things has to change along with how we and our bodies are changing. Sometimes the environment that we're living in needs to change to accommodate new needs. And sometimes things just get more complicated. And so we need to be prepared for when something acute or sudden will happen. We also need to plan for the fact that maybe what we need to manage our care needs to change as we are changing and as our needs are changing. And certainly as people are getting closer to death, things are changing even more so. And so ideally, conversations about our medical needs, our health priorities are happening kind of along this continuum of our life. We're not just doing it at the end of life. We're not just doing it one time. We're doing it sort of all along the way. As things are changing, we make a shift in our plan and our plan changes. So I don't think anyone should feel like once they do an advanced directive, it can never be changed. It should be changed. In fact, I would expect it to be changed. And ideally, we're starting this process far sooner probably than any of us thought we should. Like I started this process with my kids when they graduated from high school. So when they turned 18 and they became adults under the law, they now get to make their own decisions. I'm no longer their default decision maker. So we started having these conversations in my house that early, because it doesn't matter how old you are. You could be riding your mountain bike, you could be playing in a sports team at college and something unexpected could happen where decisions will need to be made and we're not going to be able to talk to them directly. So do we have a plan for that? And I think if we can talk about these things earlier, it makes it so much easier as we're moving along the sort of the highway of life, right? That things change and it becomes just a normal part of what we do to take good care of people. So with thinking about this conversations evolving across a continuum, the tools we have to document your preferences and priorities are also kind of varied along this continuum as well. At the top of this kind of upside down pyramid, you see the appointing of a healthcare agent, the person who will make decisions if you can't make decisions for yourself. This is the biggest part of the pyramid because it's what the most people should really are going to need to do. It's kind of the entry level into advanced care planning. And then as people age, as their health changes, and we're having these ongoing conversations, there's more tools with more specificity and more detail that we can complete along the way. Try to ensure that the documentation sort of aligns with how our needs are changing. So what are these things we call advanced directives? I think that we've had a lot of names for them over the years, that's for sure. But essentially what these are documents that just capture the conversations that you've been having with your loved ones and with your family. So we have different kinds of advanced directive documents. We have a document for appointing a healthcare agent. We used to call this a durable power of attorney for healthcare. When we updated our laws, we changed the name, but essentially a durable power of attorney for healthcare. If you come from another state, you may have heard this referred to as a healthcare proxy. And now we have this term healthcare agent that we're using in Vermont as well as in other states. These are all synonyms for the same thing. It's who's been authorized to make decisions for healthcare. And then we also have kind of treatment directives, documents that really capture the goals, the values, the preferences, and may even have information about specific kinds of treatments that a person would or would not want. And we used to call these living wills or treatment directives. Now we just call them, advanced directives kind of in total. And these are legal documents that need to be honored when possible, keeping in mind that we can't always predict the situation that will come ahead in the future. And so documents often don't really speak to the exact situation that's happening, the medical situation. And so oftentimes we need to apply the goals and the values and the things that the person said are important to them to a new medical situation that maybe they hadn't anticipated. Working in the hospital, I would say it's more frequent that the document doesn't speak exactly to the situation because people just can't predict. Even if they have a chronic illness that they could have expected might have caused problems or caused them to be hospitalized, suddenly they had a stroke when all along it was their their lung function that was the problem, and that was the thing we thought we were going to have to be dealing with, but it turns out now we've got this other issue we've got to deal with. So they're usually nuanced documents, and we do try to apply them, and that's what the benefit of a healthcare agent is. They can help kind of fill in the gaps and apply some of that context and give meaning to these new situations. The tools we have in terms of forms are comprised of this one very small 2-page form. It's called the Appointment of a Healthcare Agent form. Then we have these other 2 documents are more focused on the goals and the values. They also include the ability to name a healthcare agent, but they get a little deeper into what's important. We have a short form that's 6 pages long, and then we have a long form that's 20 plus pages long. Make sure everyone knows these 2 forms, the top 2, the agent and the advanced directive form, they're now available on the Vermont Ethics Network website in 14 languages. So we've really worked hard to try to make this accessible, including American Sign Language, so with videos attached. So really trying to make this accessible to all Vermonters. Then we have a registry. This is a secure database that Vermont pays for its residents to be able to send their documents to so that they can be readily accessible when needed. It used to be that people filled these out and put them in the safety deposit box or in some drawer in their house somewhere. And unfortunately, what would happen is the emergency never happens, during banking hours. So you could never get to the safety deposit box when you needed to. And then it was this flurry of chaos in the home as people were trying to, rustle through as many drawers or things as they could find to get a hold of this document. So having a registry allows for these to be immediately accessible when needed so that we can identify who do we need to be talking to and what do we know about this person to make sure we can take good care of them here in alignment with what they value. And then the third thing in the tools is medical orders. So these are different than advanced directives. They're not preference-based documents. They include preferences, but they're the documentation of a shared decision-making conversation with a clinician. So with a physician or an advanced practice nurse or a PA. So they're a little bit different. And this is the order, I think, Pam, that you were talking about. This is what EMS is looking for. Any questions at this point? I know I'm going through it kind of quickly. Megan?
Yeah, hi, Cindy. My question is probably a fairly standard one, but so if I'm in Massachusetts and get in a car accident, does Massachusetts sort of automatically check our state's registry? Or, I mean, you could be in Europe too, any place. So what happens if you're not in Vermont, please?
Sure, that's a great question. So if you're not in Vermont, I mean, the ethics, if you will, about respecting people's right to be self-determining applies sort of across the country in the United States. And I'm going to an international conference, so I'll learn more about how it works in other countries as well later this summer. But so if you're in Massachusetts and something happens, the first thing they're going to do is try to rescue you. So a sudden, like let's just say a car accident, because that's sort of an easy thing to think about. They're going to stabilize you. EMS is going to stabilize you, and they're going to transfer you to the hospital, and they're going to try to figure out what's going wrong. When you register a document with the Advanced Directive Registry, you get a wallet ID card that you can carry. And you also get a sticker that you can put on your driver's license that says, I have a document in this registry. So as soon as they are kind of figuring out who you are and how to get a hold of your contact people, they can then use that wallet ID card to access your document in the registry. They can also call the registry. It's a 24/7 service, or they could even call the Vermont Ethics Network, although we're not here 24/7, and they can get immediate access to documents. Massachusetts does not have a state registry like Vermont does. So it's not like they're going to say, oh, I need to check the registry because that's part of what their normal process. Like all of our hospitals in Vermont, it's required by law that they check the registry when a person who lacks capacity comes in. But that's not the case in other states that don't have registries. They probably check their medical record and they do other things because they have obligations, federal requirements around checking to see if people have advanced directives, but they may have different systems. So the use of that wallet ID card is really helpful. Once they learn that you have a document, there is very good reciprocity between states in terms of respecting who you've appointed as your decision maker and the decisions that you've made, obviously to the degree they apply, because they may not apply to the situation you're in, depending on what your document says. So especially in the Northeast, all of our states have, we have language in our law that says we will honor other state documents, and other states have similar language in their laws, because this idea that people have a fundamental right to be self-determining is reflected in all states' advanced directive laws. There are some uniquenesses across state lines in terms of types of treatments and things like that, but in general, they're very well respected, and certainly the person who's been identified to make the decisions. Great question. Callie?
Hello. Our office has recently come across situations where people have had more than one healthcare agent that are of equal standing, not one that's a secondary. And we are having trouble understanding how that works in practice. And are medical professionals required to reach and consult with each one of them in an emergency, or is it just whichever one they reach first gets to make the decision? Is that something you can speak to?
Yeah, well, we generally try to reach both of them, right? I mean, we try to reach both people, but if you can't reach them both and there are decisions that need to be made that are time sensitive, then you're going to go with the person that there's practical realities too. We aren't going to delay or, not provide standard of care or align with someone's wishes, if we don't have both people. But typically, it's important to sort of decide how that's going to work. I mean, the person can sort of figure that out ahead of time. And when you do have co-agents, we have obligations to try to reach them both. But there's only so far that we're willing to go to delay kind of making a decision or doing what's needed. And oftentimes we will task, I think, the other agent, right? If we've reached an agent, we've tried to reach both of them, we can't, we only get one, then we're going to talk to that agent and say, have you been able to reach your brother? Whoever, because, we need to decisions need to be made, and we can't kind of delay providing the kind of care that this individual wants because we can't reach someone. So I think co-agents are tricky. I think I like co-agents because I think there's safety in numbers. So I think it's nice for the agent to have someone else to work with, because it kind of shares the burden, if you will, of having to be responsible for at least voicing these decisions for this person. But I also think it's complicated sometimes, because sometimes co-agents aren't on the same page. They're saying different things. And so we have to sort of navigate that dynamic not infrequently in the hospital setting. So it's nicer if there is more of a hierarchy. If they say, well, this is my primary agent, and if you can't reach them, then this is the person who's next in line who I authorize to make my decisions. I think that's really helpful. But I've also seen it work super well with two agents. And sometimes they'll just say, we'll go with the one, you can go with whoever you reach. Like sometimes we make that plan in advance. But ideally we would, if there's co-agents, we would try to reach both of them to a point. But we're not going to, delay what needs to be done, especially if we have one agent who is engaged in working with us. Because part of the responsibility of the agent is to be available. So that's part of their obligation. When they say, I'm willing to serve as my loved one's healthcare agent, they are saying, I am willing to be available when needed to help and facilitate and make decisions. And so if we can't reach them, we can't reach them. We try and then we move on with what we have.
And if they do conflict in what they're saying, the multiple healthcare agents, it does the one with that's furthest in the direction of providing care, is that the default, or? Okay.
No, the standard for how you make decisions is based on knowledge of the patient's goals and values. So you can divorce the healthcare agent from the document if there is a document that speaks to goals and values. So we see this a lot. We see healthcare agents that are just making decisions, but they're not looking at what the person said was important to them. So sometimes our job is to redirect them back to the document and to say, and also to help them understand that maybe we're informing them of what's happening because we don't really need them to make a decision. The decision was already made by the document. If this document does speak to the situation we're in, I don't need the agent to say it's okay for me to do what the person told me to do. I just need to tell them I'm following this document. So I think it's important to help agents understand our ethical and legal obligations to patients and to the documents that we receive that patients have given us, so that they're clear on what decisions we need them to make and also what decisions we don't need them to make because they've been made by the patients. I'd say that's probably a little bit of a shortcoming in how those things unfold in practice. I think a lot of times we just start talking to agents before we have a good understanding of what decisions have already been made. And so, we need to make sure we clarify that because sometimes it sets up a conflict that is unnecessary. But we default to the decision that most closely aligns with the values of the patient first and foremost. That's what we call a substituted judgment standard. So that's true for whether you're a healthcare agent or whether you're a medical guardian appointed by a court. You have obligations to make decisions that align with what the patient would say if they could, right? That's how you have to act as an agent. And so we're looking for that standard. If no one can provide it, because let's just say we never talked about it. They only filled out a healthcare agent. We never discussed anything, which is not uncommon either. Then we default to what's considered a best interest standard. And that is based on kind of what most people would choose. And also the proportionality of what we're talking about. And by that, I mean, every treatment or medical intervention has benefits and it has risks and burdens and harms that are associated with it. We do surgery, we cut people open, we do all kinds of things that have a lot of harm associated with it. But the trade-off is a great benefit, right? Restoration of your health. You're back to doing the things you like to do. You had a surgery, we fixed your heart, and now you're back on the treadmill, jogging or walking the dog or whatever it is. We have to be paying attention to the proportionality of the burden and the benefit. And so as long as it's in favor of the good and it's kind of consistent with what we think the person would want, we move forward. But if it's not, if it's all a lot of harm and not a lot of burden and not a lot of benefit, it's very disproportionate the other way, then that doesn't necessarily mean we move forward. In fact, I would say ethically, it's problematic to do things that only harm people and won't help them. We shouldn't be doing that. And so best interest doesn't mean we just default to preservation of life as long as possible. It's based on what's medically feasible and keeping in mind that we can't just harm people. We have an obligation not to. So that's how that sort of happens. But it's a conversation. It's not ideal when people with equal power don't agree. And so I guess as you're thinking about who to name and who to pick as your healthcare agent, I would caution you to say, make sure if you pick multiple people that they know they have to speak in one voice, and the voice they need to speak in is yours, not their own. They have to speak in your voice and represent what you would say if you couldn't. And that may be different from what their values are. So that's really important when you're selecting a healthcare agent.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
So if the only thing the person has done is to appoint power of attorney that includes health, and they haven't filled out any other documents, but they've talked to the person knows very well what their wishes are, how honored can that be if the person hasn't done a COLST? So they get to the emergency room, the health proxy shows up with their durable power of attorney and says, wait, she doesn't want to be resuscitated and she doesn't want to be intubated or whatever the things are that's in the immediate.
Yeah.
Is that, how sufficient is that?
It's sufficient because healthcare agents have all the same rights that a patient would have to make all the decisions that the patient would make if they had capacity. So when
Okay.
you name someone as a healthcare agent, and that includes the right to refuse.
Yeah.
So the right to say no is a fundamental right, right? It's what we call a negative right, the right to non-interference.
Yeah.
People have the right to say no even when they lack capacity.
Yeah.
And so when you name a healthcare agent, you're conferring with them all the same rights that you would have. So they can forego life-sustaining treatment or what we think would be maybe life-prolonging treatment if
Okay.
they're reflecting that, listen, we had conversation about this. They said they would never want this.
Okay.
Then we have legal authority. They have the authority to make the decision, and we have the obligation to respect the decision of a named valid healthcare agent.
Okay, so EMS needs a COLST, but once they're at the hospital, one isn't needed if there's a,
The healthcare proxy. Yeah, because EMS is just, that's not their role, right? They're not they're rescue, right? And so they
Yeah.
don't have time to sort of suss it out.
yeah,
Their role is to rescue
Yeah.
and stabilize and transport, right? And so they don't have enough time to go through what a hospital would go through with case managers and other people who can be having those conversations while people are tending to the needs of the patient and doing the evaluation.
okay,
We talked about healthcare agents, people authorized to make decisions named in advance by a person who has capacity. Just keep in mind that people can't name a paid caregiver or healthcare or their healthcare provider unless they're related by blood or marriage as their healthcare agent. So that people know that. And also you can only name adults. So only adults can complete these documents, 18 years of age or older, and you can only name somebody to be your decision maker who's also an adult, 18 years of age or older. And then the advance directive really is the plan that you made in advance. It includes the appointment of a healthcare agent and either the living will or the treatment directive or just the values. And it has those preferences and priorities for future treatment, right? It's kind of what you're anticipating you would want at a future when you can't give that information directly yourself. So I don't know if it's useful, but I thought it might be nice to just look at the short form advance directive because it's the most common form, just so you know what's included there. This is our what we call the short form. It's that 6-page form that we talked about. The first part right here is naming of the healthcare agent. And this is where you assign the person, or you maybe put multiple people if you want to have co-agents, as Kaylee indicated. Or maybe you say, well, I want it to be this person, and then if they're not available, I want it to be that person. You may also list other people that don't have decision-making authority, but you're basically saying it's okay for you to talk with them about me and about my health and what's going on. So I'll use myself as an example. My husband's my agent, but my children who are adults are listed here as is my sister and my brother and their spouses. Because I would want them to be able to at least have information about what's going on, even if they're not making decisions. I can list my primary care provider here. And then if there are people that I don't want to have involved, that I don't want them to be part of my decision-making, group, or to just have any information about me, frankly, I can list them here. And we are obligated at hospitals to respect when people say, no, I don't want them involved. I don't want them having information about me, and I don't want them, participating in decision-making. People can list folks there as well. And then when they want their document to start, and this is kind of all part of part one. I would say this is a confusing section, but in general, we don't look at these documents unless the person doesn't have capacity. People retain the right to make all their own decisions until they have been assessed as not being able to do so. And that's when we look at these documents. But there are times when people want to specify exactly when they want the document to start. So they can do that here on this form. And then we get to kind of, what are the goals? What are your priorities around your health and your needs? And so this has kind of a combination of short answer and check boxes depending on what people like. I will say you don't have to fill any of these sections out. You can just pick and choose the things you want to fill out. You can customize it to make it your own. These are more suggestions based on kind of what most people kind of want to communicate, but you can follow your own kind of lead, if you will, and make it really reflect what's important to you. There's no right or wrong answer. It's really what's right for you. But again, you can sort of signal where you are if you want anything and everything that might be applicable to try to prolong your life. If you're maybe the other end where you're really like, I've lived a good life. I always use my husband's grandmother because she was in this, I think from 80 to 94, she said, I'm ready. When he comes, I'm ready. She'd already, one of her children, two of her children and her husband had predeceased her. And so she was like, hey, when it's my time, I'm ready to go. She didn't want anything done to prolong her life. And then most people I'd say are kind of in the middle. It depends on what's wrong, depends on what it's going to take to fix it and what life will be like after you fix it. So you can be anywhere on this continuum, and maybe you want to write it out instead of using a checkbox. That's okay. If you're dying, you can give information about where you'd like to be if that's a priority for you. And then if you have any religious or faith concerns or wishes, you can certainly put that here. If you're part of a faith community that's helpful to you, you can let people know that and how to contact them. Again, this is really about your goals, your values. And then we get to this section that this is really where we get in. Some people really want to communicate about specific types of medical interventions. And they do want to talk about CPR. They do want to signal kind of where they are on that, how they feel about the use of breathing machines if they needed to go into an intensive care unit and have support with breathing. If they're not able to swallow enough food or water, if they'd want on their own, if they'd like that to be administered artificially, and even the use of antibiotics, whether or not they'd want those provided. Keeping in mind that you can complete this, but this does not take the place of a DNR cold order. So what I would say is this is really useful for people when there's time to figure out what's going on. They come into the hospital, something's wrong, we don't know what, and we're trying to figure out what's going wrong. Is this fixable? Is this not fixable? Where are we? And then once we know more information, we can start to make a plan as to whether or not use of any of these interventions makes sense and is in alignment with what this person would want based on what we know about the prognosis. It isn't a good tool in an emergency because you have to know, do it or don't do it. I will say that if someone is checking all of the never boxes, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this, that to me is a signal that they need to meet with their healthcare provider or their physician or nurse practitioner and talk about, does it make sense for them to have one of these medical orders? You know, are they that committed to, doesn't matter why my heart stops, I never want this provided. Doesn't matter why I'm struggling to breathe, whether it's fixable or not, I do not want to go to an intensive care unit and have a breathing machine. I would accept dying sooner versus having that medical intervention. If that's how this person really feels, then they definitely need a cold order and ensure that that preference is respected in that emergency situation. Any questions? This is often confusing for people, so I just want to make sure I hopefully explained it well. And then the last part of this is it talks about organ donation, if you want to be an organ donor. And then if you have, like, maybe you've made a pre-need contract, maybe you've already, you know, got everything lined up in terms of your funeral and burial arrangements, you can fill this out as well. If you have any specific wishes, you can put that here. Again, that's a suggestion. It's not required to fill out all of these sections. I will say that if you're going to intentionally leave things blank, just draw a line through the section, you know, if you're filling it out on paper, or you can just leave it blank if you're doing it all online. You can do it either way, but sometimes that's helpful. And then this is probably the one part that you can't omit. In order for this to be a legal and valid document, it needs to be signed in the presence of two witnesses. And when I say in the presence, we now have the ability to do the witnessing remotely. meaning you can do this via phone or a video, kind of telehealth video chat with your neighbor or whoever's witnessing. And then you would document that their name, that you told them that, you know, you're completing your advance directive and you're not being pressured or under any sort of undue influence to do it, that all the decisions you've made are voluntary. And then you put their name, and then you just document that, you know, their relationship to you and their phone number, and then that it was done via video chat or phone conversation and the date. Because during COVID, we had to make allowances for the fact that people needed to be socially distant from the kinds of people who could serve as witnesses. And so we didn't want that to be a barrier to people being able to be self-determining through this pandemic that has persisted long beyond what we thought it was going to. And then just as a reminder, if these documents are being filled out while you're in the hospital or in a residential or nursing home, a residential care or nursing home, there's an explainer that needs to also just meet with the individual and make sure that they're doing this of their own free will and they understand the nature of the document they're completing. The explainer can be one of the witnesses, so you don't need 3 different people, but you definitely need someone to, you know, sign. And often I would recommend having the explainer sign in 2 places if it's the same person, just to avert any sort of question as to whether or not they've got the required witnesses. Any questions about that? No? Okay. So I just wanted to talk briefly. This came up, this comes up frequently. It's this thing we have in Vermont called a Ulysses clause. That's sort of the name of it because it harkens back to Odysseus, where he, you know, told people to chain him to the mast of the ship, tie me to the mast of the ship so that I won't listen to the call of the sirens and be averted from course and run the ship aground, right? So it sort of aligns with that. What you're doing in an Ulysses clause is sort of akin to what he was doing, right? He's saying, what you're doing is you're saying, listen, if there's a point when I don't have capacity and I can't make decisions for myself and my advance directive's been activated, I want you to listen to what's in the document and not to what I'm saying. Because remember, as I spoke earlier, to the fact that people retain the right to say no, even when their capacity is impaired, and we have to respect that. This allows them to say, listen, if I'm saying no to something that I would always say yes to, but because I'm in this acute problem, my health, I'm delirious from something that's happened, or I'm concussed and I'm saying wildly crazy things, or maybe I have an underlying mental health issue that's in an acute state, and I'm saying things that are just not consistent with what I really want. It's the disease process or the delirium that's talking, not who I am. Don't listen to me when I'm saying wacky stuff, when I don't know what I'm saying. Listen to what I've put in my document and to what my agent's telling you. So it's a big deal to do this because it's a fundamental right, your right to say no, but you can do it. And so this allows the person to do it. And it would allow us to treat a person who lacks capacity, who is refusing, to treat them over their objection, to get them sort of better. I'm seeing more requests about this in the instance of dementia. And certainly it's historically been used for people with psychiatric illness who maybe go off their medications, they become more acute in their disease, and they end up in the emergency room, but they're saying no to the medications that help keep them stable. And so this would allow their healthcare agent to say, yeah, I know they're saying no, but give them these meds. They want these meds, even because they anticipated that this could happen. And they have a plan for it, and we need to honor that plan. It requires more signatures and more witnessing. It's its own section that needs to be signed and witnessed in its own. So the individual has to sign, and then their agent has to sign saying that they acknowledge that they have this power. Their treating clinician needs to sign saying that, you know, the person understood what they were doing and they were consenting to it. And then they need to have this sort of third-party disinterested individual, because of what they're doing, make sure that they understood what they know what this means, that they appear to understand its effects, and that if they're in the hospital, that the person who's serving in this sort of explainer role isn't affiliated with that hospital, so it's very protected. So I just want to let people know that this exists. I see people sometimes use just this section of our long form advance directive and attach it to a short form because they don't want everything else that's in the long form, but they just want this piece. So just letting people know that this exists, and that's the process for filling it out.
And
Go ahead.
Cindy, so you just mentioned, I have younger onset Alzheimer's. So for that separate section, while I'm still considered competent,
Mhm.
I could fill that out now with my doctor and all these other people.
And your healthcare agent, yep.
And my healthcare agent, and then that would hold true. That would be respected. So it doesn't have to be a mental health medication issue. It can be applied for people with a
Yes.
progressive
Yes.
dementia situation.
When I first started, yes, the answer to your question is yes, it can be. And I think it's increasingly being used for the very purpose that you're describing.
Yeah.
It's difficult to know how that disease will unfold and progress. And so sometimes you may be refusing medications that can help you stay at home. But because of your illness, you're not able to think through that. And so this would allow your agent to say, yeah, just keep giving her those medications because, you know, she wanted them before. So you can detail, you know, like I do want the following treatment provided over my objection at the time the treatment's offered, and you can list what it is. Maybe it's certain medications, it's certain things that you've already discussed with your physician. Go ahead.
But it could also be used in the opposite direction.
Exactly.
That I didn't want, say, antibiotics if the outcome was not likely to be positive or something. I don't know. Say I don't want
Yes, you can
antibiotics.
use it in both directions, so
It
it
can
works
go in
both
both
on the
directions.
request
Okay.
and the refusal. Yep, you can use it in both ways. That's
Okay.
accurate. And I will say the first time when I first started working at the Ethics Network back in 2008, the way I learned about this in the mental health context.
Yeah.
That's how I learned about it. And then a group of very savvy elderly folks who lived at Wake Robin pulled me aside and said, hey, so you know, we're using this to ensure that people respect our right not to be fed,
Right.
not to be spoon fed when we no longer.
Yeah.
So that was
exactly.
a completely non-psychiatric use of the form. And so they explained it to me, and they told me, listen, it's kind of like voluntarily stopping eating and drinking, but if you don't have capacity, you're not voluntary anymore, right? Because you can't make a decision.
Right.
They planned for it. It was pre our medical aid in dying law. And they said, listen, and they were using it specifically in the instances of dementia when they said, I don't want my life prolonged when I don't know who anyone is. And so what they were listing was things like when I don't recognize my loved ones, when I don't know who I am. I mean, they were listing other kinds of things. So it was interesting to me, and I learned this, you know, a long time ago now, that this form was actually being used in a way that I didn't know until this group of individuals told me this is how they were using it.
Yeah.
So yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. I will say, if you're going to, on the feeding piece, on the, you know, assistance, if you want to try to use it that way, you do need to have some conversations. If you're living in like a long-term care setting, you need to do a lot of planning and conversing about that, so everyone's really clear what the plan is, because those types of facilities have regulatory requirements that require them to assist people with feeding. They also have regulatory requirements that say they need to honor people's advance directives. So it just means we all need to have a lot of good conversation and communication about the plan. So these forms are not a substitute for that kind of, you know, in-depth discussion with the people who are likely going to be providing your care or responsible for making the decisions.
Okay.
All right. I just want to talk a little bit about HIPAA, because we get this question all the time, frequently from attorneys, and ask, why don't the forms that we provide include a HIPAA release? Why doesn't it say in the form that it's okay for you to share information like additionally? And it actually does say so on the form. If I go back, I'll go back to the form right here, which is, I'm naming these people to make my decisions, and I'm also listing people who can be consulted about medical decisions. Well, it's difficult to make medical decisions if you don't have any medical information. Like, I can't make a medical decision for my dad if I don't know what's going on, what the health problem is, what his situation is, what's happening. So as it relates to HIPAA, the legislature anticipated this, and they actually say in our law, unless otherwise specified, an agent or guardian will have the same rights as the principal would have to request, review, receive, copy any oral or written information regarding their physical or mental health, including medical and hospital records. So agents have, by giving an agent the authority to make the decisions, you've released the ability, you've signed the release that says you can share information with this individual. They can participate in any meetings, discussions, or conferences concerning healthcare decisions. They can consent to the disclosure of health information, and they can file a complaint on behalf of the principal regarding a healthcare provider, facility, or residential care facility. So they have all the power by being named as a healthcare agent to do everything that they need to be able to do, including to receive and review all the medical information that's necessary for them to make decisions, including all the records. And just keep in mind, these documents are meant to be shared. The goal is, in order for people to respect your wishes, they need to see your document. And so we don't consider this protected health information. So we don't want people putting their social security numbers on these kinds of documents. These are preference-based documents. They have personal information because they have your name and your date of birth and your address, but they don't have protected health information, not the way that would be in your medical record. And when you give someone power to make medical decisions, you're giving them power to access your medical records so they can make medical decisions based on the facts of what's going on. So I just wanted to share that. So once the advance directive is completed, you have to make copies, the original for yourself, or if you're doing this with someone else, give a copy to the people that are going to be making decisions for you or involved in decision making. Give a copy to the doctor. Give a copy to where you're most likely to have your healthcare provided, and the hospital. And then it's optional, but we highly recommend sending a copy to the Advanced Directive Registry. As we talked about earlier, this is a secure database that allows for immediate access. You get annual reminders that are mailed or emailed to you, which is a nice prompt to look at your document and make sure it's still accurate and that it reflects your wishes. It can be accessed by hospitals as well as other facilities who are authorized, and it's connected to a national registry, which is the U.S. Advanced Care Plan Registry. Vermont pays for space in this national registry, which means if you move out of state permanently, you can transfer your file from the Vermont portion of the registry into the national registry. If your state doesn't have one, you can still be part of the national registry. When you submit forms to the registry, you're required to just fill out some administrative forms that can create an account for you. You can send your documents in by mail, fax, or email. And then if you're submitting them for the first time, you need a registration agreement. And then if you're making changes, you need to complete an authorization to change form, but it's all part of one form and it's attached to all of the forms on the Ethics Network site. So you always have what you need if you print forms off of our website for submitting to the registry. I just want to speak briefly, I know we only have a few minutes left, about medical orders, because I know people have a lot of questions about these. So again, DNR, do not resuscitate, is what it stands for. The COLST portion of the order stands for Clinician Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And basically, these are only completed by a doctor, nurse practitioner, or PA. They're really the only planning document that is binding on first responders. And so if you have one, you should keep it posted in your home, on the fridge, or in the fridge, using a file for life or vial for life. You can notify local EMS. Some communities will do that. My guess is Chittenden County, not so much, but if you're in a small community where everybody knows everybody, it's not uncommon for EMS to know which folks in their little community have these orders. they wouldn't keep one on file there. They don't do that, but it's not uncommon for in the smaller towns with volunteer, first responders, that they know people that have these. You can get a DNR identification. So you can get jewelry from these two, Medical Alert or Sticky J, you present them with your DNR order and they can provide you with a small cost. I think it's like $39. You can get a piece of jewelry that says, Vermont DNR. And that piece of jewelry would be honored the same way as if you were carrying your paper order. And then you should make sure your friends and family and your healthcare agent know that you have one, so they can also be an advocate for respecting your wishes. We don't send medical orders to the registry. Medical orders are for you to keep, and you're in charge of them when you're in an outpatient setting. And when you're in the hospital, it's the hospital's responsibility to keep track of what orders you have. Just so people know. And that's what the form looks like. It was recently updated, but you can't fill out your own COLST order like you do an advanced directive. You can fill out your own advanced directive, but you need to sit with a clinician to complete a DNR order. It's kind of like you can't write your own prescriptions for things either. This is like a prescription for your advanced directive. You need to be with someone who can sign these orders, and that's what the form looks like, just so you have an idea of it. All right, so just to summarize, and I want to have something pop up in the chat. Are there legal repercussions if the secondary agent makes a decision that the primary agent disagrees with? Well, it may be tough for them. I mean, they probably can't make a decision until we, I guess I don't know who asked that question. I don't know what you mean by legal repercussions. I mean, if we have more than one agent, we're working with both of them and we're trying to figure if there's a conflict, we're trying to come to some consensus around why there's a conflict and how it can be resolved. But I'm not sure what the legal repercussions would be. I will say that increasingly we are seeing cases across the country that are being brought by people. They're actually wrongful life cases where people were subjected to treatment that they didn't want, that they said they didn't want. It was in their directive that they said they didn't want it, and yet somehow it still got provided. And now they have survived whatever happened, but they're in a state that they did not want to be brought back to. And so in other parts of the country, we're seeing a rise of these wrongful life where you shouldn't have done this to me and left and brought me back to a state that is inferior to what I said because I told you I didn't want it. I put it in my advanced directive and you didn't follow it. So I guess to the degree that a healthcare agent went rogue and didn't follow someone's document, I suppose something like that could happen, but it hasn't happened in Vermont yet, and I hope it doesn't. Just to recap, advanced directives, people with capacity can complete them. They guide future medical decisions about a time when they can't make decisions for themselves. They're frequently nuanced, requiring some discussion, some context, and some interpretation sometimes, because we maybe weren't sure what people meant by what they were writing. And then only a person with capacity can complete one and update one and make changes to it. COLST orders are different. They're the outcome of a shared decision-making process. They're medical orders. They're completed by clinicians. It requires informed consent, and it's intended to guide the current treatment plan. It's based on the patient's current medical condition and their goals and values. They're sort of combining the medical facts with their hopes and their wishes and their priorities and coming up with a plan together with a clinician that makes sense for them. And consent for these orders can be provided by someone who's not the patient. So that healthcare agent could consent to one. A guardian can provide consent with the requisite court review process. And family members who aren't agents or guardians can also provide consent as well. And then these are the tools. So on our website, we have a whole range of things about naming an agent, a broader guide that's like a booklet you can get that has lots of information about medical decision-making, a little flyer that talks about these limitation of treatment orders. We have another flyer that kind of has information, and these you can look at on our website. You can see the whole contents on our website. And then the registry, the guide to the registry, the sort of is an overview of that. And we published a booklet a while ago. If you're in the position of making decisions for someone else, we also have a booklet that talks about your responsibilities if you're the person who's the healthcare agent or the medical guardian, and you're in the position of having to make decisions for a loved one who can't make decisions for themselves. So lots of resources available on our website, if that's helpful to you. And I provided links. I think it came out with the meeting planner that Dan sent around, links to forums and other resources and other questions that you can get answered on our website. And that's it for me. And right under the wire, Dan.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate, very comprehensive overview. Really great to have you here today, and thank you. Before we wrap up, are there any quick announcements before we go this week? All right. Well, thanks again, Cindy. I really appreciate it. And then I put all of your information to contact you in the announcement for this meeting. So people should have that. And Cindy's been helpful when I had something come up that I had a question about, and she answered it right away. So thank you so much.
Anytime. Thanks for having me. And thank you all for sharing your lunch hour with me.
All right.
Thanks, Cindy.
Have a
Thank you
great
so
day.
much.
Have a great
Thank
day. Bye-bye.